This is the London Fintech Podcast, bringing you practical insights and approaches, stories and inspiration from the innovators who are building the new world of financial services. This podcast is brought to you by NextWave, strategy specialists and solutions for financial institutions. Welcome to London Fintech Podcast. We've had fintechs large and small across the financial services sector guesting on this show, and we've talked a lot about founder stories and growth journeys, the importance of product market fit, and having a commercial sales focus from the very beginning. However, something I've not yet dug into is how to market a growth fintech. I think this is a super interesting topic because just as the fintech market is evolving at increasing pace, especially propelled by AI, so the marketing landscape is changing too. And many of the strategies that may have worked a few years ago are no longer going to be that effective. So you want to grow your fintech business. The modern marketing landscape is complex, multi-channel. So where do you start and what do you focus on? We're talking about brand, multi-channel digital marketing, social media, influencer marketing, paid media, PR, podcasts, no surprise, and more. So here to help me understand what works and what doesn't is Shameer Sachdev, founder and CEO at Growth Gorilla, who are the go-to growth agency for fintech marketing that actually works. They've helped over 50 fintechs scale and thrive in one of the most competitive industries. So Shamir knows what it takes to drive real measurable growth, and that's what we're going to be talking about. Shamir has a background that started in wealth management before getting into marketing, I believe, and is also a growth advisor to VC-funded fintechs and a podcast host. So that should make my job easy today, or perhaps he's going to end up asking the questions to me, but we'll see. Welcome, Shamir. Good to have you on LFP.
Hi, Tony. Yeah, great to be here.
Great to see you. So let's just start with a little bit about you. Can you tell us a bit about your background and how you got into fintech marketing?
Yeah, of course. So my background is quite unusual, actually. I started off as an equity broker. I did that for a number of years, and even at one point, actually had my own equity broking firm. I then moved over to, from advising clients to an execution-only platform, kind of what I refer to as the sort of first incarnation of fintech. You know, traditionally, execution-only platforms were telephone-based. Eventually, they got they became web-based. They were downloadable apps, and then eventually they became web-based apps, and then mobile apps. And I was kind of there when we went from sort of the desktop to web-based apps, and launching our mobile app was a PR event. And while I was there, I started off on the sales side, slowly took over the marketing activity as well. Ran that for 5 years for the trading firm. And grew them from sort of loss-making 400,000 to about 9 million rev and 3 million EBITDA. So yeah, quite a journey. And then decided to set up my own agency to help other fintechs.
Well, I can see the background has really helped there, and those are good numbers. So I presume you're working with firms that are in and around that stage in their growth journey and helping them scale out.
No, well, actually, to be honest, the range is quite broad now. I think in our early days, we were working with a lot of sort of pre-seed, seed, early stage startups. But as time has gone by, we've kind of grown with our customer base. A lot of Series A stuff, a lot of Series B stuff. And to be honest, we actually look after the 6th largest fintech in the world and manage all of their influence and marketing activity globally. So, they're worth about 80 billion. Yeah, it's Ant Group, actually. So Ant Group looks after, or that includes Alibaba, AliExpress Pay, World First. Looking after all of their influencer activity.
Great. So operating sort of really at all ends of the spectrum. So we're going to talk some more about that in a moment. Just before we dive into fintech marketing, just a little bit more about you, because I know the businesses, agency businesses, scale up businesses are all immersive. I know that from what we're doing on the consulting side, but when you're off duty, and I always tend to ask guests on the show this one up front, but what do you like to do to switch off?
Well, in my spare time, I'm an astronaut. The key thing here is that I actually have no spare time. So it's just a pipe dream. Yeah, like I said, it's all immersive. My work is the agency. My hobby is the agency. And then when I do have some downtime, I'm a dad and a husband, although my wife would probably put a question mark against the husband bit on occasion. So, to be honest, I'm kind of all in on the business. Immersive is, the right word for it.
Well, that's not a unique answer from folks who've come on the show, but being an astronaut is, I love that. So it's in your dreams anyway. So fintech is a broad term. What do you really class under the fintech definition and the types of companies particularly that you work with?
Yeah, I was thinking about that question, and I think you go back sort of 5, 6, 7 years ago. FinTech was a product that was tech first to support whatever financial service your product or app was offering. So take a money transfer product, for example, having an app that you can actively transfer funds on. That's fully tech enabled, end to end, without sort of personal intervention. That was kind of like the definition of fintech, in my view. I think as time has gone by, I think that definition has changed a little bit, because we're seeing a lot of traditional financial services organizations become tech enabled. I think with that, they're arguably just as much fintech as some of these sort of early stage companies from 5, 6, 7 years ago. So a good example is, you take Monzo. That was a digital only bank. Yeah, do everything via the app. That was their USP. They had no branches. But you look at HSBC and Barclays nowadays. They've got a perfectly viable app, arguably as good as Monzo's. Some would argue not. But you can kind of do everything that you want on there, and they're slowly reducing their footprint in terms of their branches. So they're tech-enabled finance. They are fintechs now.
Yeah. So the out and out fintechs and the incumbents. And yeah, I totally see that as well. There's a convergence, and we have had guests on this show from both ends of the curve there. And I've got one of the world's largest banks on the show in a few weeks' time, and they have thousands of technology patents, and they're doing really innovative stuff, and it's very tech first. And that you've only got to look at the league tables for the world's largest institutions, and the tech first ones like JP Morgan, top of the list, right? And so there's definitely a convergence there, although it's still a diverse and a very complicated landscape, and there's all manner of different products and service offerings popping up, and it's quite an interesting landscape. The research that I've seen suggests there's 3,000 fintechs in sort of startup stage in the UK, and probably 30,000 globally. So there's plenty of businesses looking to work out how they position and how they grow.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably say London's probably one of the largest fintech hubs in the world. Like you said, sort of 3,000 in London. I think New York in the US actually is one of the largest, and that has about 1,500. So it kind of gives you an idea that there's such a deep concentration in London of, in and around the fintech space. The market has shrunk a little bit. There's been a lot of M&A over the last sort of 12 and 18 months or so. But funding's coming back slowly. And I think, we're going to continue to see a growth in this space.
Yeah. And this is a nice sort of segue, I think, into the central topic here, which I really want to unpack in the next few minutes, about growth marketing for fintechs. But in the same way that the incumbents and the scale players and the world's largest banks are all very rapidly becoming tech first and tech enabled, and it's a new dynamic. It's been in the making for many years, but that's a sort of new dynamic on the institutional and traditional firms, and particularly in sectors like wealth and asset management. Some of them are still relatively close to the starting line, and others are well down the track. But in that same way, I think the marketing landscape has evolved as well. So if you're a traditional marketer coming out of corporate, and I was a traditional consultant coming out of consulting companies, and marketing was a bit of a sort of white paper afterthought and maybe go to a conference, I think the whole world of marketing has completely evolved in line with the broader financial services market, which is why we're going to be talking about some of the things we'll talk about in the next few minutes, which might feel a bit odd or a bit awkward for a traditional finance person, like influencer marketing. What on earth is that? So we're going to get to that in a minute. Growth Gorilla, I think for those watching on the YouTube version of this, is on your top. I love the name. What's it all about? What are you doing with your clients?
Yeah, so we, kind of, as you've kind of said, we're a growth agency. We specialize in the fintech and financial services space. We've got sort of 3 pillars: pay media, influencer marketing, and then creative production. That creative is there to do 2 things, really. One, weave the gap between sort of influencer marketing and pay media. And then second of all, it's to, I suppose, activate or support activation of running advertising on social media channels. That's kind of sort of our sort of key remit in terms of the areas that we sort of operate in. Predominantly, we look after mostly sort of B2C retail focused fintechs. We do work globally. Our record for a single client is 25 countries, but I think we've run campaigns in over 40 now. starting to rack up the numbers.
Like that. You use words like weave and activate. So there's the dark art right there. So most traditional finance folks are probably, reading lots of interesting things on LinkedIn and not doing much else with their social media. There's a whole world here. So let's talk about it and see if we can understand how some of these more modern approaches are working. Can we start with driving growth for a fintech in this landscape? This myth that build a great product, a fintech product, and the market will come to you. I've got lots of examples and guests on this show. We've talked about it as well, that you just can't succeed unless you've got this extraordinary, unique innovation position, or you've invented something that nobody's seen before, and you're lucky enough to go sort of viral on that. You've got to have that commercial DNA and the sales team in the business from day one. And it's, as we all know, it's entirely led by demand and pipeline generation. So I'm a big proponent of standing up the commercial part of the business immediately. And in fact, think demand testing and product market fit testing at the start. But I'd love to hear it from your side. What actually works, and how should fintechs really be approaching this?
Yeah, I think. Look, to start off with, yes, having a great product is that's table stakes, I suppose, for any business. But I don't think you necessarily need to be completely entirely unique. There's plenty of businesses out there. Let's take the trading space, for example. The forex trading, CFD trading, spread betting market. There's probably a dozen or so sort of key players in the UK at the moment. I think there's about 800 globally, or at least there was a few years back. They're fundamentally all selling the same thing, but the number one in the market space in the UK is IG Markets. Why is that? Well, they've spent an awful lot of time, energy, effort, and a great deal of money making sure that they've elevated their brand, against their peers. So I think, it's not a case of just having a product that's 100% unique. It's also about actually cutting through the noise and then putting your product in the palm of the hands of your prospective users. And you've got to kind of do both at the end of the day. And we've seen it in other circumstances where you can actually have a subpar product, but actually have great marketing and still be the number one player. There's plenty of businesses out there that their customer service is better and their product's better and their website's better, but for some reason they can't get out of the number 3, 4, 5, 6 spot. Well, probably because they're not spending enough on marketing and not spending enough in terms of elevating their brand and actually cutting through the noise.
Yeah, I totally acknowledge that. Brand and messaging, and in this always-on digital landscape that we're operating in, it's so important. So how should fintechs think about crafting fintech messaging that actually works and helps them stand out?
So it's sort of a two-part question, I think. Actually, I think we could break that up. I think there's, partly it's how do they go about crafting their messaging, and I think the second bit is how do they actually make themselves stand out. And I think there's, they do dovetail nicely. I think in terms of sort of crafting messaging, I think the key thing is to actually go and speak to your prospective and existing customers and take the time to understand what their challenges are, what their pain points are, and then really understanding what they like about your product and what are the features, what are the benefits that truly resonate with them. And then from that, you can then distill messages, content that you can then turn into marketing material. In terms of standing out, I think, for fintechs in particular, not traditional financial services companies that are now becoming fintechs, I think it's about zigging when everybody else is zagging and getting yourself on marketing channels that are not being occupied by the traditional financial services companies. For example, paid social and influencer marketing. There's two key areas very broadly. And then actually when you're on those channels, actually doing something creative with that space. Anybody can spin up an ad, put that live on Facebook and drive some installs into their app. But I think the ones that have done really well and really have stood out from the crowd are the ones that have taken time to be a little bit more creative and have really pushed the boat out in terms of their creativity. I think if you do that and you take somewhat of a risk, you're then going to place yourself in a position where you're head and shoulders above your immediate competitors in the fintech space, and then you're actually stealing market share from the traditional guys. And I think for the traditional guys, it's not too dissimilar advice. Their marketing mix is fundamentally out of home, TV, Google. They don't really venture that much onto social, and when they do social, it's done usually very lackluster and as an afterthought. And I think what they need to do is think about working out how to really harness their social channels, because all of the challengers are jumping onto the Facebooks and the TikToks of the world to try and acquire users and trying to develop brand equity, whereas all the traditional firms kind of already have that brand awareness and they have that brand equity. If they ventured into that space, they could become a real problem for the fintech challengers. So I think it's both sides have areas that they could improve upon. I think it's that creativity piece and being a little bit more adventurous overall.
Yeah, there's quite a lot there. So the product market fit piece, listening to your clients. I spoke to Alistair Heggie on the InsurTech episode a few weeks ago on this. It took him 100 conversations to hone their fit for the market. But of course, created a very clear niche, and also the whole narrative that described the product position and the problem that they were solving for the clients, because of course that's where you're going to start, right? It's a customer pain point or a customer need, a job to be done, and that's what every product should be striving to address. The second half of that, where you're talking about social media and influencers, and that's the uncharted territory, as you said it. The early stage fintechs, the more innovative perhaps, are on sort of the lesser understood, at least by the older folks in the sector, the lesser understood social channels, perhaps the TikToks and Facebooks, and the incumbents. To my knowledge, anyway, not really going there. But let's talk about that for a bit then. Perhaps give us an example though of a fintech who's got that brand position right using some of this new media approach.
Yeah, I think my favorite example from the fintech space is, I don't think they're doing it so much more now. They pivoted a little bit. But about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, there was a company called Shares that was spending an awful lot of time and energy and effort on their social media piece. And, they really sort of done a lot of work in terms of activating and acquiring users from TikTok and Instagram, and reaching into a space where all of the traditional guys were effectively missing. And they've done a great job, everything from utilizing influencers and ambassadors, and then obviously the channel mix as well, as I said, TikTok and Instagram, which has totally been ignored by the traditional guys. So I think they're a great example of who's done it really, really well. I think Chip are starting to do a really good job. I think their overall channel mix is really, really strong, and they're doing out of home stuff, good sort of social media stuff, mixed with a nice bit of sort of the traditional sort of advertising. The two I'm thinking of, one is based out of Canada, a company called Ledin, a Bitcoin lending platform. Again, they're doing a nice mix of influencer, social, search, really sort of good broad range there. They've done some great work on PR. I think they spend a lot of time on their creative piece and their brand positioning. And they're also launching a payments platform out in the Middle East at the moment. And they're kind of on their way to sort of utilising all of the social channels as well.
Yeah. So let's talk about that playbook for a minute then. So your aspirational growth fintech brand, you want to use new media channels. You've done the work on product market fit. So you think you know what problem you're addressing, and you've got a great product. You want to go into this space, and there are terms like brand ambassadors and influencers and new platforms in the mix. How do you decide? I mean, or even find? You say, presumably there's something around what do we stand for, what audience are we trying to attach to or entice, and then a series of filters to go find people who embody that persona that can take the brand forward. I mean, I'd love to know a bit more about how do you do that if you're a finance brand, but without really a tribe, if I can call it that, out in the market. How do you go find your tribe?
Yeah, so I think like with any marketing strategy, like you said, you always start off with your audience. You start off with your target customer, and you really have to try to sort of gain an understanding of where do they live online, and how are they consuming information, and how are they making decisions about their finances. Google search is kind of always seen as like the go-to immediately and is part of the marketing mix. But what you have to remember is that Google search is a it's a high intent platform. People are actively searching for what they are looking for. But if you've got a solution that's disruptive, that's a challenger, or you're not a known brand, then they're not going to be looking for you on Google. So it's almost redundant to focus on that as a key platform. What you need to do is create awareness of your product amongst your audience. You go back many years ago. The only way to do that was really press, out of home, and traditional media. But the digital landscape, or I suppose the advent of digital, has meant that you can target your niche audience extremely effectively. And so, for example, if you know that you're going after, let's say, 35 to 45-year-old individuals who are sort of mid-net worth, it's really starting to take their finances seriously, and they're thinking about their pensions, and you want to get in front of that audience. You can run really sort of focused campaigns on Meta, so Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, to reach that audience. But there's other channels as well as part of that. You can go and do partnerships with podcasts that talk about personal finance and pensions, for example, or you can work with influencers that talk about personal finance, and there's actually a handful that talk specifically about pensions as well. And partner with them to get your brand in front of that audience. So I think it's the starting point is the target audience, and then it's thinking about being creative with your marketing mix, and also then being realistic about what sort of budget you have as well. If you've got, a ridiculous budget, well into the sort of tens of millions, then you can do a fully integrated campaign across TV, press, out of home, Meta, Insta, TikTok, you name it. You can throw you kind of throw the kitchen sink at it. But if you've got a limited budget, you kind of work from the kind of sort of inside out. So being really focused on that target audience, really drill down on them, handful of channels, and then, as I said before, being really sort of thoughtful about the sort of content that you're producing. Now, that content can be things like static ads and typical sort of creatives that you see on Meta, or they could be content that you've produced in partnership with influencers and creators that have a deep understanding of the personal finance space, and work with them to actually help promote your brand. Terribly broad answer, but it's a rather broad question as well.
Well, there's some specifics in there as well, I think. So, and this requires a creative approach and a knowledge of the tooling that's out there, I think. So you were talking about targeting particular personas on Meta. So presumably the tools are there so that you can put your credit card down and say, these are the demographics and the territories and the categories that I want to go after. And the algo will promote your post, your ad, to that community. Is that the sort of thing that you can do on the major platforms?
Yeah, you can't. Well, yeah, 100% you can do that. Times have changed a little bit with platforms now. Meta is taking more ownership over the targeting side. So typically what you do is you set your target audience up, and then you start putting your creative in front of them. And then really what you then want to do is sort of point Meta in the right direction, and then effectively tell it, hey, can you go find me more customers that look like this? And there's kind of two ways of doing that. You've got to kind of do both. One is from the creative side. The better quality creative that you have, and that's more specific to your audience, it will pick that up. And as it sees the right users clicking that ad, it will then start serving that ad to more people that look like your target customer. So your creative is incredibly important. To kind of sort of summarize it, you're better off having a really good quality creative and no targeting with Meta versus having great targeting and a rubbish ad.
Well, that's the art and the science of doing this, I think. So what is a good piece of creative? What's a good piece of content? I mean, we're not talking about the definition of pixel perfect. We're talking about I'm pretty sure the messaging or the format or something. But what constitutes a good piece of content that's going to propagate like that?
In my view, good piece of creative has a really clear hook or key message, followed by what I refer to as sort of the hygiene factors. So summarizes what the product does, and then a really clear call to action, and then should be supported by a solid headline and then description copy on the add-on in terms of social. Also, it has to have really good visual piece to it as well. So having pictures and images of your platform and app, that's okay. People is even better. Or better still, people using your app, or maybe extracts of your app is quite good as well. And then really that's kind of like sort of the baseline. And then really from there, you've got to try and sort of not try, but you've absolutely have to sort of test to see what works, and you can't ever stop A/B testing. So there's a million and one types of creatives that you can test. You can test what we call sort of problem versus solution, pain versus gain, testimonial ads, product feature ads. The list goes on. We've got a list of about 45 different types of ads that you can test, and then variations within that as well. And then you've also got various formats. So you've got your static ads, your animated ads, your video ads. I think for where we are now, for me personally, we don't do a lot of animated ads. It's really going to be a mixture of static ads, or it's going to be video ads, particularly UGCs. That's content created by influencers and micro influencers. And the reason for that is that you take a platform like Instagram. When you're sort of on your feed, static ads tend to be sort of more popular there. But when you're going through sort of the reel section, you need to have a vertical video. Otherwise, your users are going to just scroll straight past you. And then to get on TikTok, you need to have UGC. Video ads don't work there. Animated ads don't work there. It needs to be UGC. It needs to be native looking to get any form of engagement with that audience. And we can come talk about what works there as well.
UGC. So UGC stands for what?
Right. So it stands for user generated content, but it's one of those terms that's become somewhat bastardized, right? So before user generated content was content created by your users. And now what's happened is it's manufactured content by creators. And so actually your real user generated content is now called CGC, or customer generated content, just to make it difficult. You also have EGC, which is employee generated content.
Love it.
So yeah, it's a whole world. Fundamentally, this is where we're working with micro influencers and professional creators to create content for us that looks native to the platform, whether it be TikTok or Instagram. Yeah. And what you want to do is work with the creators to let them produce something that they know is eye-catching to the audience. And what you want to do is your sort of contribution is providing them with the most comprehensive brief that you can provide. And then from there, again, it's around the testing thing. You can be testing, the first not even 4 seconds these days. I think it's about 3 seconds, 2 seconds probably. The first couple of seconds of your creative needs to have a compelling hook. It needs to look, not overly produced. And I think keep it under 30 seconds. 20 seconds is best. Keep it short, sharp, communicate your message, clear call to action. And that's about it, really.
There's a lot there, right? So we're really starting to peel the onion now. So this is really interesting. So, and I love the sort of tangibles, the 2 second attention span, the 20 seconds, the user generated content, and the fact that this is a process. So I'm not sure folks always appreciate that. You hire an ad agency and you say this is one and done, let's place an ad. But you talked about 45 different types of content and doing A and B testing, which is which one works essentially, and working a process through. So you can't necessarily expect your marketing advisors to have one answer, and you have and all the big brands have run multiple campaigns over the years, and they would have gone through a process to focus in on the messaging that works, and then they still modernize and change that periodically to freshen the campaign and to tap a different angle on the market. So you're really going through that process quite systematically, and then leveraging this whole world of creator economy, new media, personalities, which is where I want to go next with the conversation. So you've sort of done your core messaging, and you've done a certain amount of iteration A/B testing, and placed some ads on Meta, and you've done those things. Influencer marketing. So in the context of FinTechs, let's talk some more about that. How do you go find your influencer? How do you strike up a deal so that they're going to create some of this UGC content for you? And what's that whole process?
Yeah, so it's quite a dark art. Think of it, well, when I try and sort of explain to people, I say think about buying TV ads, but you're not buying it from a really, really mature organization that has really, really clear systems and processes. You're buying it from a very unstructured and in a very sort of unstructured, organized fashion, because you've got to bear in mind that each creator is its own little mini channel, and they might have 5,000, 10,000, 100,000, 500,000 followers. Their pricing is completely subjective to what they think is appropriate for what they're doing, and they don't have necessarily structured processes in terms around creative production or working with brands. There's actually quite a well-known Finfluencer, who's quite famous now on LinkedIn. And when we did the work with her, she sent us an invoice via Canva, and the number was 00001. So it gives you an idea, and it was like a link to Canva, and I was just like, she didn't have zero to send an invoice. So it can get like that sometimes, or they'll turn around and go, yeah, we're happy to do that. You get all the work done, and then they'll just send you a link going, can you Venmo it to me? And you're like, no, I can't Venmo it to you. It's not how it works. So yeah, look, that overall process there's kind of a couple of ways to go about it, right? And it really depends, what are you trying to get from your influencer, and what's the end goal really? If you're looking to get direct conversions, then my immediate response is don't do influencer marketing, because that's not what influencer marketing is for. You're better off in that case setting up affiliate deals with some of these influencers and paying them on a CPA basis and just taking the risk out of it, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to measure it and establish, if, however, you're looking to drive brand awareness, get eyeballs onto your brand and educate an audience and reach corners of the internet that your paid advertising can't reach, then that's when it's time to start working with an influencer. Also, it's a very cost efficient way to reach an audience, or can be more cost efficient than pay media as well, especially if you're in quite a crowded space. So for example, like payments or trading is a good example of that, or investments as well. And then really, you kind of, again, you want to work from sort of the inside out. So the first stop that nearly all fintech and financial services brands go to is, we want to work with Finfluencers. And that's fine. But the reality is there's only a certain number of influencers in the UK. Let's just talk about the UK for the moment. Okay, we're talking a list of maybe 30 or 40 individuals here. And they've got brand deals with various other partners. And so what you'll probably be doing is kind of following the crowd a little bit. You should work with the influencers. They give a certain, they give a degree of authority, and they, give good quality social proof. And I think for more technical content and reaching a core audience, definitely worth working with them. But then it's also thinking about your actual target audience and then working your way out. So you can start thinking about working with, broader sort of maybe lifestyle influencers, or maybe working with influencers that are speaking to the same audience, but maybe about a completely different topic. A good example is we're doing some work for a payments company, and they're targeting e-commerce sellers. So there's only a handful of, there's a couple of hundred really influencers that talk about that, but there are an absolute abundance of influencers that talk about how to set up e-commerce stores. Or, for example, I talk specifically about how to advertise and use and leverage Shopify, Etsy, Amazon. And when you start looking at that space, suddenly you go from having a couple of hundred influencers to having thousands. And so you've got to kind of work your sort of way from the inside out and finding that right audience. The other thing as well is just thinking about the age of the audience that you're going after. So, for example, if you're going for a younger audience, TikTok's a great place to start. Twitch is really, really good as well. But if you're going after an older audience, then YouTube tends to be sort of the direction that you want to sort of go into. Instagram is pretty solid as well. But, they're not hard rules. I was going to say, I quite like podcasting as well. I think it's massively undervalued. I think right now there's a podcast for everything. And there's some great great deals to be had there, because a lot of the podcasters will take their content, chop it up, put it onto TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. They usually have a newsletter that goes along with it as well. And you can do a great brand deal with them and get yourself, on the podcast, on their YouTube channel, on their socials, and in their newsletter, and you're hitting their audience in multiple places, and creating numerous touch points with them.
Yeah, look, there's so much there. Finfluencer, that's a new one for me, and I think you used that word about 5 times in that answer, and it's a really nice description. I remember when we had Betterment on the show talking about wealth management for the Zillennial generation, and combining Gen Z and the millennial demographic, and that was my favorite word from that episode. So Finfluencers, and you're talking about different platforms, and I'm very interested. Certainly for me, I find this quite fascinating. I'm sort of on both sides of the fence at the moment as well, because hosting this show, I've become, in my small way, a creator. And I've had PRs on behalf of one of the world's largest banks, if not the largest, and one of the large credit card companies approach around sponsorship and brand deals for London Fintech Podcast. So you sort of find, I know how that feels from the other side, and you're not necessarily set up to commercialize that at scale, because and I'm sure that's true with a lot of the influencers you're dealing with. Hence, you're getting invoices that have been knocked up on Canva. It's not really the machinery of commerce. It's all about the creativity. And platform wise, crikey, I was going to, my advice to the fintech audience, or those who've been in the sector for a few decades like myself, is spend more time on YouTube, because it'll keep you young and you're going to tap into the creative economy and see what people are doing. And you came out with saying, if you really want to reach the youngsters, go on TikTok. And if you're a bit older, go on YouTube. So if you're still lurking just on LinkedIn, I mean, we've got a way to go to really get on the front end of the media that the next generation is actually dialing into, which I think is perhaps not as well understood across the sector as it might be.
Yeah, it's I mean, look, as I said, there's no sort of hard rules for these things. There's sort of generalizations. Yeah, I think it's very much a case of looking beyond, Google search and Facebook and YouTube. There's a whole world out there of platforms. I mean, Twitch is, I think, a platform that's being used by a lot of like gambling and gaming organizations to do their advertising, doing influencer deals there. But actually, it's a great space for more community-driven fintechs to go to and doing deals there. TikTok, I think, is, I think if you're going after that younger audience, that audience that you're trying to on-ramp into sort of personal finance, you absolutely have to be there. Equally, having said all of that, I mean, the age of TikTok is, or at least the balancing age, the proportions, it is getting older by the day. Like you go back a couple of years ago and you'd be hard pressed to find, a 40-year-old on the platform, but that's not the case now. I think about 35% of the platform is 35 plus. So, it is indexing, older as time goes by. And so, it can't be ignored, but you've got to treat it in a completely different way, in comparison to how you would treat, say, Meta and how you would treat Google, and indeed how you would treat YouTube as well. So it's also thinking about, having a TikTok first strategy, or an Instagram first strategy, or a YouTube first strategy as well. But you can't always do those things if you haven't got the budget to do it. So you've got to kind of put your stake in the ground and see it through. And I think that starts off with, working out where your audience is, where they're consuming information, and reaching them there. But also at the same time, just being balanced to say to yourself, well, if that's a really, really crowded space, do you need to zag when everybody else is zigging?
And this, I guess, is where your growth agency partner comes in, because this whole new world and landscape, there's lots of different ways you can navigate, so many of which will probably not bear any results. So finding someone to help you navigate and find your Finfluencer and land the message properly and manage multiple channels together and bring it all together to add value and actually grow the business is the art and the science we're talking about here. Yeah, I think we're sort of scratching the surface. And it goes back to that point I was making at the top of the show about the marketing landscape evolving as fast as the fintech landscape, essentially. And we're all having to reinvent and evolve faster, perhaps, than we're comfortable with to keep pace with all of that. There's something we haven't spoken about yet, which comes up in every single episode and probably will for some time, which is AI. So AI generated content, and you can now create videos, you can take synthetic avatars, you can create music, you can do all sorts of things. So what's your take on that? I mean, is that your co-pilot for next generation marketing and advertising, or is it a problem?
I don't think it's a problem at all. It is, it's going to become part of our everyday life, no matter what area we're working in. Specifically talking about marketing and kind of how it affects your marketing team and your marketing efforts. I think in the first instance, it should help massively improve your marketing team's output. I think right now, every marketing team should be using AI to help them get through all of that sort of low-level administrative tasks that they have. It can help them, put first drafts together of copy. It can help them, analyze data and pull out insights. It can help automate tasks that were very, very manual before. And I think that's just the starting point. And if you're not doing that, then that's what you should be focused on right now. As time goes by, my view is that AI will, massively increase the output of every individual sitting in your marketing team. The sheer volume and the sheer volume of content that they will be able to produce will increase massively. And as AI gets better, the quality will improve as well at the same time. But also, it will help you as an organization in the business to reach decisions quicker. And what I mean by that is that rather than having to what was to a complete sort of take a large organization that's been running for a good number of years, and that's got thousands and thousands and thousands of customers and almost an infinite number of data points, to sit there and take a step back and go, right, we really want to analyze our data to see how we can drive higher quality users at lower cost. Right now, if you try to kick that process off, I mean, that's a task that would take months, if not a year, really to get to the end to. And I mean, really sort of going through every single data point, not just a top level, let's have a quick flick around the CRM and see what we come up with. Going through every single channel, every single event, every single audience, every single bit of creative, etc. I think in the next year or two, we'll see AI products and solutions that will turn that around in weeks. And I think the hardest part of it will be accumulating the data to put into the platform. And the actual munching of the data by the AI agent is going to be, no time at all whatsoever, really. And then I think it's, what to then do with that data and then how to implement it. And then it becomes the implementation piece. Talking about A/B testing, you'll be able to A/B test on scale, and not just, the hook, the call to action, the color, and maybe the headline copy and the description copy. But we're going to be able to analyze, 30, 40, 50, 100 data points in any single creative. And then I think the step after that is, if you're then working with an agency that specializes in the sector, that's doing this for multiple clients, you'll then have a point where actually you can then become almost predictive as to what is going to work for your brand, before you even put the ad out there, which is something that we're kicking off a project with at the moment. So that should be interesting. So I think it's something that we've got to embrace as marketers.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to it. I think as AI gets better and better quality, I think it's going to be great in terms of a marketing team, in terms of sort of outputs and talking about synthetic UGC creators and content and ads and whatnot. I think that we had a little trend of people creating virtual influencers and creators, and they are out there and they're doing quite well. Some of them have got a lot of followers. My personal view is brands are still going to want to put out content that's real and authentic. Where I see it, and where I think the equilibrium will kind of end up being, is they'll want to work with them, agents. They'll either want to work with agencies or in-house teams that are leveraging AI to produce the content itself, but they'll want it to be hand polished or hand finished by marketers who actually have experience and can actually put the finishing touches on it.
Yeah,
that's my view.
I think I share much of that. The ability for AI to amplify and accelerate the creative process, huge. You talked about AI agents that would be able to crunch the data as well. I think what will get interesting is later this year when agentic AI really takes hold and it can move the mouse and do things as well. There's the downside of that is we get completely flooded with algo generated content and outreach. The upside is it can do a lot of heavy lifting. And really augment the workforce in a way that what hasn't been possible before. And there's an announcement every week on what's possible with agentic AI. So watch that space, and it's probably a topic for a future episode. If we could just bring this back, just to sort of put a wrapper around some of this and talk about the growth journey. So you talked about supporting early stage firms and large scale firms that are going through fundraising series, and we started up at the top of the show talking a bit about how many fintechs there are in the UK and the focus in London. If you throw the horizon a bit wider and you say globally, and I think you do work with a number of global firms, what's your playbook? What's your perspective on global expansion? Perhaps incorporating some of what we've been talking about, going deep into platforms and influencer marketing and so forth. But curious, when's the right time to go global, and what are your sort of top tips for firms that want to globalize?
Yeah, so I've done a couple of talks on this, and I've got a sort of it's a 7-step process. I call it a 7-step process, and I kind of go through that. My sort of step number one is, I always sort of ask the question, are your pockets deep enough? Do you have enough money to support a global expansion? And then even sort of scaling that back a little bit, do you have enough money to support launching into a whole new territory? I think a lot of times it's done out of vanity, and there needs to be an exercise that needs to be completed internally, the organization, which is, if we, how much is it going to cost in real terms, not just marketing costs, but resource costs, tech costs, all of that sort of stuff, legal costs, etc., to launch into a new territory. If we were to take that money and spend it in the existing territory that we're in, could we generate a better ROI in percentage terms, in real terms? And I think that's sort of the first point. So almost sort of putting people off from doing it. If you don't need to do it and it's just a vanity thing, then don't do it, because it is a very, very large, costly, painful exercise. And it's never as easy as you think it's going to be, because you've got to think about languages and people and localization and, economies of scale and whatnot that make it viable to do that. And then assuming that you've gone, well, actually, we've maxed out where we are. We've got the budget to do it. We need to do it strategically because we're trying to block off a competitor or something like that. It's then working out what territory to go after. Where should you launch? And I think you've got to look at, things like, which country has the best addressable market for you? How many competitors are in that particular market? How many sort of regulatory landscape, and what does that look like? And then, what's the cost of advertising and media in each of those territories as well? So we did that for a client of ours, and we scoped out, I think it was like 10 countries in Latin America to work out which was going to be the best territory to go after. And we looked into all of those things. And, one of the key things that came out was we kind of had two front runners for the territories that we want to go after. But in one, the cost of media was just so much higher than the other that it made sense to go into a different territory. And also, Latin America, one of the things you've got to think about is Brazil's always a great country to go after, but they speak Portuguese, whereas everywhere else speaks Spanish. So by kind of going into Brazil first, you're kind of not leaving yourself room for maneuver. Whereas if you go into a Spanish-speaking country first, like Mexico or Argentina, it's actually easier to grow out of there. So you've got to think about those sorts of things. Then it's obviously the target audience themselves, who are you going to acquire? Is there genuinely a use case for your product out there, where you're going into? Or is there, I suppose not an or, but is the use case the same as your existing territory, or is it a different use case? So again, that crypto firm that we spoke about, one of the biggest issues in Latin America versus where they are in North America is inflation is running rampant, out there. So the use case was slightly different, and we needed to take that into consideration as well.
A lot of business strategy leading the marketing strategy there, which I think is absolutely illustrative of you need to fundamentally think about the market position and how you're going to show up and where the customer demand sits and all of these things are. And that leads straight into your marketing strategy. It's almost the same thing. So I think that was coming out very loud and clear, actually, as you were going through that, Shamir.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's once you kind of nail down sort of, the target audience, the language and all of that sort of stuff, you can then start thinking about your channels. And then, back to the start, what channels are best? How do we want to approach them? How do they consume information? Are they engaging with content in the same way as the territory that you're currently in at the moment? Is it different? How is it different? And so on and so forth. So I think it's, one of those things that needs to be thought through thoroughly. I do think a lot of brands rush it for the sake of it, just so that they can turn around and have another headline. And where we sort of see, and I think the other thing we see a lot as well is, and two things really, is if it's a US based company or a company from Europe trying to go into the US, they'll turn around and go, we want to launch into the US. US is humongous, right? And it's 300 million people. The population of the UK is 70 million, 50 million adults. It's a completely different playing field. You're going into New York at best, or California at best, or Texas. Start off with a single state. The same thing for the Americans as well. A lot of times American brands will reach out to us and go, we want to launch into Europe. And we'll go, well, there's 30 odd countries here. I don't know exactly, 30, 33. And there's many languages as well. Where in Europe do you want to launch, do you want to roll out to? And arguably, it's more of a minefield because you've obviously got individual language considerations, but then also regulatory considerations as well. So, and then that boils back down to the budget piece as well. So there's a lot to think about there.
There is a lot of things to pull together, but I feel like we have covered quite a bit of the, if I can call it, the new media marketing landscape. Starting with that product fit and then unpacking platforms and channels, and I love some of the detail we got into there about finding your finfluencers and how you do content that works and those things. So lots of nuggets there, but we haven't got much longer. So just sort of pulling this to a conclusion, perhaps advice for the audience. So the audience for this show is incumbent financial institutions, barring fintechs that are on the way, and interested parties really on a global basis. But if there was three things perhaps for the audience that you would recommend from your travels in this whole space, what might they be?
I think first thing is just general advice to everyone in the fintech and financial services sector, which is be more creative. Don't be scared of compliance. Work with them. It's not an afterthought. Bring them into the early part of the conversation when it comes to sort of coming up with creative ideas. Zig when everybody else zags. A good example is at the moment, you go onto the tube in London, every fintech and their mum has got an ad on the tube at the moment, promoting ISAs. There's better ways of doing that that are more cost efficient. And then I think the third thing is keep speaking to your customers and your target audience. Your audience will change over time as your product changes. And so you should have a regular feedback cycle that you're conducting to garner new information about your audience. And then probably the fourth thing and last thing as well is set up your tracking and analytics properly. Every single brand that we've had on our podcast that we've spoken with, every single one of the successful ones had their analytics and tracking sorted out. They invested time and money into it, and it's not a lot of money and it's not a lot of time. So just do it.
Love that, analytics and tracking. But my favorite is zagging when everyone else is zigging. So I think I'm going to take that one forward. And what are you reading or listening to, Shamir, currently?
At the moment, I am reading Infinite and Finite Laws. I'm listening to that. It's a hard listen, but it's interesting. Podcast-wise, I'm taking a break from business podcasts at the moment. So right now, I'm caught between sort of the Flagrant podcast and Brilliant Idiots, which is quite amusing. Yeah, if you're easily offended, don't listen to either of those two. Yeah, that's probably my current repertoire at the moment.
If folks want to find out more about new media marketing, influence marketing, about you, where do they go?
Yeah, so you can reach out to just contact us via the website, growthgorilla.co.uk, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, Shameer Sachdev. Search me in the search bar. There's only one of me. You'll find me quite easily.
Yes, thank you. There's a great conversation. There's a lot there. There's some things I'm going to take home to what we're doing in the sector more directly, I think, and something there for everyone in the audience. So thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for sharing your insights with London Fintech Podcast.
Amazing. And thank you for having me on today.